Welcome back to the Read Along Book Club of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the original 1818 text. This, of course, begins Volume 2. Our deep dive into it, our summary, our commentary, our conversation, you might say. Speaking of which, I would love to hear what you guys are thinking of the book so far. Volume 2, I think the last video was so damn long. By the time I got to the end of it, I was exhausted and I forgot to give you my thoughts, what I was thinking about the book so far. So overall, I'm enjoying it. It's been so long since I've read it, like I said, back in high school, that I've forgotten so much that it's like reading it again for the first time. The only memory I have snippets of events, imagery, dialogue, etc. from when I first read it. But it's the strongest memory I have, I guess, is how difficult I found the text. And ironically enough, from 1818, the text is not that difficult. I thought it was. Granted, it is written in a much older fashion of English, but still, it's surprisingly simple to read, surprisingly accessible. And I'd love to hear in the comments below how you guys are feeling about it from a reader perspective, a comprehension perspective, because that's what I was afraid of. Granted, I'm so glad it's a very short book, because I think that kind of language over time could get arduous, let's say. But overall, enjoying the book. I can't remember if I mentioned this when I read it in the first part, but I shouldn't say a surprise or a disappointment, but something that stood out to me as very strange, in that the fact that Victor Frankenstein created the creature so quickly and the first time. Because, granted, again, I will constantly forever give credit to Mary Shelley for creating such a pivotal work of literature at the age of 19, by the way. But me, as a story nerd, someone who studies storycraft, somebody who loves writing in all of its forms, it surprised me that there were no failures beforehand, because I can see Frankenstein or Victor creating this monster, trying to create something, failing miserably, creating abominations, you might say, even more horrible things than what the creature is now. Well, I guess that's debatable depending on who you ask. And then maybe he's forced to kill them, get rid of them. I don't know. Anyway, but it would further emphasize his obsession. It would really get deep into his character. And speaking of character, though, this book has so much character, does it not? I mean, one thing when I go back to like the 50s or the 60s, or I guess even before that, reading science fiction novels, because I do love science fiction, I often find that the ideas in the books are stronger than the storytelling, which disappoints me. This book, labeled as the first science fiction book ever written, has volumes of character. It has reams of it. It's so rich with character, but it also has ideas. I think it's a perfect balance of characterization and ideas. And to see that kind of care, way back then, is so surprising to me. But it could be the fact that during the golden age of sci-fi that a lot of people were just so obsessed with ideas and they wanted those at the forefront. Anyway, I'm rambling, but anyway, in short, amazing novel so far. I have some very, very small complaints with this book, but overall, I'm really just shocked at how modern it feels. For, again, 1818, pretty crazy. This is the unrevised version from, I think it was 1831 or 1832, something like that, where she went in and tweaked stuff. I'm curious to read that, and I would love to know if you've read that in the comments below, because I've read little bullet points and snippets of the differences, but I don't know how it feels, if that makes sense. So if you have read it and are reading this one or have read both of them already, I'd love to hear it. And I'd also love to hear how you're feeling about the book, as I mentioned earlier. But let's get into it. Volume 2, because I don't want to make this video another feature-length thing, but who knows? It might be. I have no idea. Let's begin with Chapter 1, shall we? Nothing is more painful to the human mind than, after the feelings have been worked up by a quick succession of events, the dead calmness of inaction and certainty which follows, and deprives the soul both of hope and fear. Justine died. She rested. And I was alive. The blood flowed freely in my veins, but a weight of despair and remorse pressed on my heart, which nothing could remove. Sleep fled from my eyes. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description, horrible. So he is clearly very devastated by the consequences of what he's done. Poor Justine is dead, accused of the murder of his young brother, and he is just racked with guilt, understandably so. And really, the first few chapters of this section, anyway, are very much exploring that, him trying to cope with these decisions and these consequences, as well as what is next for him. But let's move on. The state of mind preyed upon my health, which had entirely recovered from the first shock it had sustained. I shunned the face of man. All sound of joy or complacency was torture to me. Solitude was my only consolation, deep, dark, death-like solitude. My father observed with pain the alteration perceptible in my disposition and habits. "Do you think, Victor," said he, "that I do not suffer also? No one could love a child more than I loved your brother." And tears came into his eyes as he spoke. "But it is not a duty to the survivors that we should refrain from augmenting their unhappiness by an appearance of immoderate grief. It is also a duty owed to yourself, for excessive sorrow prevents improvement or enjoyment, or even the discharge of daily usefulness, without which no man is fit for society." Interesting way to console a son, but there it is. About this time, we retired to our house in Bellerive. Often after the rest of the family had retired for the night, I took the boat and passed many hours upon the water. Often, I say, I was tempted to plunge into the silent lake, that the waters might close over me and my calamities forever. But I was restrained when I thought of the heroic and suffering Elizabeth. I love this passage because it's so contemplative. He's going out on this lake, alone with his thoughts, contemplating suicide, and it was such beautiful imagery, internalization. And again, I feel like these first few chapters anyway, really demonstrate Mary Shelley's grasp of characterization, which is so nice. But he wished that peace would revisit my mind, but that could not be. Remorse extinguished every hope. So he is just destroyed by this event. My abhorrence of this fiend cannot be conceived. So he is deeply, deeply hating this individual. He already guessed that this monster did it. We come to find the monster did do it. And it's interesting. It's not, I feel like, again, in fiction, often there's red herrings. I couldn't remember, honestly, if the monster did or didn't. And it's an interesting choice. It's funny because I feel as much maturity you find in this writing, there is some amateur things when it comes to storycraft. And I'm not saying that to denigrate the novel. I'm really enjoying the novel so far, but it's just an observation because I can't compare this to anything else, right? It was kind of a one of a kind, first of its kind, to know like what the level of characterization and those kind of thought processes were in writers' minds or their works back then. But Elizabeth says, "When I reflect, my dear cousin," said she, "on the miserable death of Justine Moritz, I no longer see the world and its works as they before appeared to me. Before I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others, as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote, and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood." So he's even tainted the well for Elizabeth. "I could not consent to the death of any human being, but certainly I should have thought such a creature unfit to remain in the society of men. Yet she was innocent, I know. I feel she was innocent. She knows she was innocent." I listened to this discourse with the extremest agony. I, not in deed, but in effect, was the true murderer. Elizabeth read my anguish in my countenance, and kindly taking my hand said, "My dearest cousin, you must calm yourself. These events have affected me, God knows how deeply. But I am not so wretched as you are. There is an expression of despair and sometimes of revenge in your countenance that makes me tremble." So Victor is making her afraid. I would love to know, because again, this is all a first-person count, but I would love to know, I can only imagine what he looks like from her perspective right now. Perhaps we shall see in the film when it comes out. I guess it's already out, but I think I'm going to see it on Friday, from the time of this recording, of course. "My father, who saw the unhappiness that was painted on my face, he proposed that we should all make an excursion to the valley of Chamonix." I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but they're going on a vacation. He's saying, hey, let's get away for a while. It's going to help you heal. It's going to help you forget. "During this journey, I sometimes joined Elizabeth and exerted myself to point out to her the various beauties of the scene. At other times, I spurred on the animal before my companions that I might forget them, the world, and, more than all, myself." Which brings us to chapter 2. So a very melancholy, it's such a great sequel, if you want to call it that, to the end of the previous chapter in volume 1. Just him, just the after effects of what he did, and not only how it affects him, but how it affects his family, like Elizabeth and his father, even though his father seems to be devastated, of course, but he's trying to cheer Victor up, which brings us to chapter 2. "The next day, contrary to the prognostications," that word, "of our guides was fine, although clouded. We visited the source of the Aveyron, sorry about that, and rode about the valley until evening. These sublime and magnificent scenes afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. My father was pleased, and Elizabeth overjoyed. 'My dear cousin,' said she, 'you see what happiness you diffuse when you are happy. Do not relapse again.'" So she's looking forward to this new demeanor he possesses. "The rain depressed me, my old feelings recurred, and I was miserable again." So the weather is making him sad. It's bringing about his misery. There's so much beautiful imagery. I didn't highlight it all. I'm not going to go over it all, but I encourage you, if you are just listening to this for the first time and haven't read the book, go back, take in some of these beautiful vistas that Victor is visiting and traveling through, because it will be worth your time, I swear. "I resolved to go alone to the summit of Montanvert." Again, don't know if I pronounced that correctly. "I remembered the effect that the view and the tremendous and ever-moving glacier had produced upon my mind when I first saw it. The ascent is precipitous, desolate. In 1,000 spots, the traces of winter avalanche may be perceived." So he's hiking up this crazy, icy, snowy mountain, which is, it's very reminiscent of where we meet him first, right? When he gets picked up onto the ship in these massive ice sheets out in the middle of nowhere. "But is intersected by ravines of snow, down which stones continually roll from above. One of them is particularly dangerous, as the slightest sound, such as even speaking in a loud voice, produces a concussion of air sufficient to draw destruction upon the head of the speaker." So death is staring down at him, literally, is it not? He could scream, he could end it all, but he doesn't, not yet anyway. "It was nearly noon when I arrived at the top of the ascent. The field of ice is almost a league in width, but I spent nearly 2 hours crossing it. The sea, or rather the vast river of ice, wound among its dependent mountains, whose aerial summits hung over its recesses. Now swelled with something like joy, I exclaimed, 'Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander, and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me the faint happiness, or take me, as your companion, away from the joys of life.' As I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing towards me with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. His stature also, as he approached, seemed to exceed that of a man. Of man. It was the wretch whom I had created. 'Devil!' I exclaimed, 'do you dare approach me, and do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered." "I expected this reception," said the demon. "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my Creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You propose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends." Wow, so he is coming on hot and heavy, this monster. "Wretched devil, you reproach me with your creation. Come on then, that I may extinguish the spark which I so these words, negligently bestowed. And my rage was without bounds, which can arm one being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me instead, though, because Victor, even though this monster, this creature is 8 feet tall, Victor is so consumed by anger that he tries to attack him, but easily he is fended off. "Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed." Indeed, he is. He is a creation, but he's being treated like a fallen angel, and we will learn much of the creature's story very shortly, and so far it's my favorite part of the entire novel. But here are your religious thematic commentaries, you might say. "Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Begone, I will not hear you. There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies. Believe me, Frankenstein, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity. But I am not alone. Miserably alone? You, my Creator, abhor me. What hope can I gather from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me." And we're going to learn the story. That's going to, it's so great coming back, reading this one time and coming back just to see how she, I don't know, not seeded it, but created this encounter, how these two opposing forces are talking to each other. "Yet it is in your power to recompense me and deliver them from an evil which it only remains for you to make so great, that not only you and your family, but thousands of others shall be swallowed up in the whirlwinds of its rage. Listen to my tale." Listen to my tale. So this is interesting as well, because what do we have? We have the guy who wants to be an explorer. He charts a boat. He's writing letters to his sister in England, and he finds Victor Frankenstein, who says what? "Listen to my tale." And now we're getting another "listen to my tale" from the creature himself. So there is repetition here. There's also some great parallels with acceptance, finding community, finding family, friendship, love, because that's exactly how this novel starts out. It's someone, remember, he wants someone to share this adventure with, to share these discoveries with. And we can see that theme repeated throughout, 3 times, in fact, at least so far. "Why do you call to my remembrance circumstances of which I shudder to reflect that I have been the miserable origin and author? Begone, relieve me from the sight of your detested form." "Thus I relieve thee, my Creator," he said. "When you have heard that, abandon or commiserate me, as you shall judge that I deserve. But hear me. The guilty are allowed, by human laws, bloody as they may be, to speak in their own defense before they are condemned." So he knows of law already. Victor is fresh off the sad, sad case of Justine and her death, and so many layers, like I was saying. Why do you call to my remembrance circumstances of which I shudder to reflect that I have been the miserable origin and author? Begone! Relieve me from the sight of your detested form. Thus I relieve thee, my creator, he said, and placed his hated hands before my eyes, which I flung from me with violence. Thus I take from thee a sight which you abhor. Hear my tale. It is long and strange, and the temperature of this place is not fitting to your fine sensations. Come to the hut upon the mountain. And he said this. As he said this, he led the way across the ice, and I followed. But I consented to listen, and seating myself by the fire, which my odious companion had lighted, he thus began his tale. And I love the fire because we'll find out how important fire is to the creature, how he discovered fire, you might say. Which brings us to chapter 3. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time, and it was indeed a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. I walked and, I believe, descended. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight, but I now found that I could wander on at liberty. The heat wearing me as I walked, I sought the place where I could receive shade. This was the forest near Ingolstadt. So the creature is born. These are his first sensations. One thing I was wondering, and I'm curious how you guys feel about it, is memory gone? Is memory stored in the brain? Is it stored in the soul? I would have loved for her to play with that, and maybe she will down the road. I'm not sure. We have one more volume to go. But I love the concept of clearly this creature is fashioned from somebody else, multiple people. So is the brain just an empty vessel at this point? It seems like she's going that route, but I'm curious if you saw any hints that I may have missed about this creature's mind clearly being someone else's, but those memories resurfacing somehow. I never noticed it, but yeah, I'd be curious to know how you guys feel about that. But soon a gentle light stole over the heavens and gave me a sensation of pleasure. I found a huge cloak with which I covered myself and sat down upon the ground. The only object that I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I fixed my eyes on that with pleasure. Several changes of day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened when I began to distinguish my sensations from each other. And sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs of the birds, but was unable. My eyes became accustomed to the light, and to perceive objects in their right forms. I distinguished the insect from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. So again, it's very interesting to think of this because he has a fully formed brain, an adult brain, and normally when children are growing up, they have a plasticity of their mind and how they learn things and how it's accelerated because that's how we're built. Whereas he has an older mind and doesn't have those luxuries, so to speak. Granted, we didn't know any of this. I don't think so anyway, back in 1818 to any sort of, depth. And it's cool to see her playing with these ideas. Like what if someone was born an adult essentially? What would that be like? And I really enjoy these sequence of chapters, learning who the creature is and how he's kind of stumbling through life and how he has the very same wants and desires as anybody else. That's a normal human, which of course becomes his bane or his torturer. When my eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive by degrees objects in their right forms. One day when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. I examined the materials of the fire. It was morning when I awoke, and my first care was to visit the fire. So he's obsessed with this fire. What does fire represent, you think? It's life. It's also, I guess, pain. It's energy. It's warmth. It has a little bit of that, cavemen discovering fire for the first time. It's a very pivotal moment in time and development that changed the course of a species. So it makes me curious if she had that top of mind as well, because this imagery is spent on she spent some time on this imagery. But I found with pleasure that the fire gave light as well as heat. It's like light and heat, right? There's a lot of subtext there. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns to assuage the pangs of hunger. When I found this, I resolved to quit the place that I had hitherto inhabited, to seek for one where the few wants I experienced would be more easily satisfied. I struck across the wood towards the setting sun. I passed 3 days in these rambles, and at length discovered the open country. It was about 7 in the morning, and I longed to obtain food and shelter. At length I perceived a small hut. The very hut where they're talking right now, probably, right? Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat in it near a fire over which he was preparing his breakfast. He shrieked loudly, and quitting the hut, he ran across the fields, because he is, of course, frightened by this individual. But I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here the snow and rain could not penetrate. The ground was dry, and it presented to me then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. Where did he get that info? I can't remember it, but clearly he's a more well-read individual, at this point in time. Maybe I forgot that detail. Let me know in the comments if I did, but I don't recall him having this knowledge that he gained with the group, the family that we're going to encounter very soon. I proceeded across the fields for several hours until at sunset I arrived at a village. How miraculous did this appear! I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked and one of the women fainted. Some attacked me until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons. I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel. As soon as morning dawned, I crept from my kennel, that I might view the adjacent cottage and discover if I could remain in the habitation I had found. It was situated against the back of the cottage and surrounded on the sides, which were exposed by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One part was open, and by that I had crept in. Having thus arranged my dwelling and carpeted it with clean straw, I retired, for I saw the figure of a man at a distance, and I remember too well my treatment the night before. Being thus provided, I resolved to reside in this hovel until something should occur which might alter my determination. I heard a step, and, looking through a small chink, I beheld a young creature with a pail on her head passing before my hovel. She looked patient, yet sad. A young man met her. Uttering a few sounds with an air of melancholy, he took the pail from her head and bore it to the cottage himself. She followed, and they disappeared. Another thing that's interesting here is language, because he doesn't know how to speak. I love the fact that he was trying to mimic the birds he was hearing, the sounds of the birds, but could not do it. And so he's reading the body language and the facial expressions, but he does not comprehend language. So he doesn't have that knowledge, clearly, like I was talking about, past memories or anything like that. So yeah, it's really fascinating to pick apart all these details and contrast them with a normal human child's development. On examining my dwelling, I found that one of the windows of the cottage had formerly occupied a part of it, but the panes had been filled up with wood. In one of these was a small and almost imperceptible chink through which the eye could just penetrate. In one corner, near a small fire, sat an old man, leaning his head on his hand in a disconsolate attitude. The young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer, which employed her hands, and as she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up an instrument, began to play, and to produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush on the night or the nightingale. He played a sweet, mournful air, which I perceived drew tears from the eyes of his amiable companion. He smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food. And I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. Again, more interesting details here, because why is he feeling this? He has emotions, he has a working brain. There's something, unless you could argue that the perception of emotion is, the processing of emotion is a mechanical thing in the human mind. But again, I'm just thinking out loud here, so forgive me. But I love what she's playing with here. But soon after this, the young man returned, bearing on his shoulders a load of wood. She continued her work, whilst the young man went into the garden and appeared busily employed in digging and pulling up roots. And then they sat down to eat. One was old, with silver hairs, and a countenance beaming with benevolence and love. The younger was slight and graceful in his figure, and his features were molded with the finest symmetry. Night quickly shut in. Well, I guess I should back up a bit, because we know how he looks. He is not very pleased with the sight. I think he's already looked at himself in the water. If not, it does happen a little bit later. But he's noting how graceful this guy is constructed, basically. How his features were molded with the finest of symmetry. But night quickly shut in. But to my extreme wonder, I found that the cottagers had a means of prolonging light by the use of tapers. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were employed in various occupations, which I did not understand, and the old man again took up the instrument. The youth began not to play, but to utter sounds that were monotonous, language again. I since found that he read aloud. The family, after having been thus occupied for a short time, extinguished their lights and retired, as I conjectured, to rest. So he's just, completely observing this entire family and learning to be a human, you might say, but overcome with emotion, not understanding exactly what that is. Granted, he's articulating that in hindsight after he's learned language and learned exactly who these people are and other details about the world. But cool stuff. Which brings us to chapter 4. I lay on my straw, but I could not sleep. I thought of the occurrences of the day and gentle manners of these people. I longed to join them, of course, right? Because it's human nature. We're social creatures. We want to be together. And it's such a tragic tale, this creature, because of how he looks. He's not part of this world. He is, but he isn't, if you know what I mean. They were not entirely happy. The young man and his companion often went apart and appeared to weep. I saw no cause for their unhappiness. Yet why were these gentle beings unhappy? A considerable period elapsed before I discovered one of the causes of the uneasiness of this amiable family. It was poverty. They suffered the pangs of hunger very poignantly. They placed food before the old man when they reserved none for themselves. So he's finding these people very giving, very kind, very selfless, right? But I found that the youth spent a great part of each day in collecting wood for the family fire. And during the night I often took his tools and brought home firing, sufficient for the consumption for several days. So he's helping them out now. He's trying to work his way in, I guess, right? But I perceived that the words they spoke sometimes produced pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness, and I ardently desired to become acquainted with it. By great application, great study, just like old Frankenstein, right? I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. Fire, milk, bread, and wood. And father, sister, or Agatha, and the youth Felix, brother or son. I spent the winter in this manner. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. And it was not less with Felix being the man. Not the old man, the younger man. He was always the saddest of the group for some reason. Felix carried with pleasure to his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. Early in the morning, before she had arisen, he cleared away the snow that obstructed her path to the milk house, and drew water from the well, and brought the wood from the outhouse. He read to the old man and Agatha, but by degrees I discovered that he uttered many of the same sounds when he read as when he talked. So he's learning language, clearly. I'd admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool. Here we go. My mode of life in my hovel was uniform. During the morning, I attended the motions of the cottagers. The remainder of the day was spent in observing my friends. And afterwards, I found that these labors, performed by an invisible hand, greatly astonished them. And once or twice I heard them, on these occasions, utter the words, "good spirit," and "wonderful." I formed in my imagination 1,000 pictures of presenting myself to them, and their reception of me. I imagined that they would be disgusted until, by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words, I should first win their favor and afterwards their love. So he's fantasizing about being part of this family. And my spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory, the present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and anticipations of joy. So we have such a great parallel here with Frankenstein and the creature. Hope, sadness, disgust, regret. Well, I guess the creature doesn't have any regret yet, but he's going to learn the pains that come with being part of the human race, I guess. Which brings us to chapter 5. I now hasten to the more moving part of my story. I shall relate events that impressed me with feelings which, from what I was, have made me what I am. I observed that the countenance of Felix was melancholy beyond expression. And then someone tapped at the door. It was a lady on horseback, accompanied by a countryman as a guide, pronouncing in a sweet accent the name of Felix. So she is a foreigner into these lands. She threw up her veil, and I beheld a countenance of angelic beauty and expression. Felix seemed ravished with delight when he saw her. Every trait of sorrow vanished from his face. He called her his sweet Arabian. He assisted her to dismount, and dismissing her guide, conducted her into the cottage. Although the stranger uttered articulate sounds and appeared to have a language of her own, she was neither understood by or herself understood the cottagers. She was endeavoring to learn their language, and the idea instantly occurred to me that I should make use of the same instructions to the same end. "Good night, sweet Safi." That is her name. The Arabian sat at the feet of the old man, and taking his guitar, played some airs so entrancingly beautiful that they at once drew tears of sorrow and delight from my eyes. My days were spent in close attention that I might more speedily master the language, and I may boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian, who understood very little. Interesting thing to think about, because we know that her history with these people is much complex, detailed, longer than that of the creature. So makes me wonder that why he is. Maybe it's just the persistence. Maybe it's the determination that he has to be able to communicate with him and be accepted. Of course, I don't know. Whilst I comprehended and could imitate almost every word that was spoken, while I improved in speech, I also learned the science of letters, writing. The book from which Felix instructed Safi was Volney's Ruins of Empires. Through this work, I obtained a cursory knowledge of history and a view of the several empires at present existing in the world. It gave me an insight into the manners, governments, and religions of the different nations of the earth. These wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? He appeared at one time a mere scion of the evil principle, and at another as all that can be conceived of, noble and godlike. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth and murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. Indeed, right? A little bit of commentary maybe. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. And what was I? Of my creation and creator I was absolutely ignorant. But I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was, besides, endowed with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even the same nature as man. I was more agile than they, and could subsist upon coarser diet. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled and whom all men disowned? Other lessons were impressed upon me, even more deeply. I heard of the difference of sexes, of the birth and growth of children, how the father doted on the smiles of the infant and the lively sallies of the older child, how all the life and cares of the mother were wrapped up in the precious charge, how the mind of youth expanded and gained knowledge of brother, sister, and all the various relationships which bind one human being to another in mutual bonds. But where were my friends and relations? What was I? So this is an interesting sequence because he gets to see humanity from the outside, and this is a great way to commentate on who we are, or I should just say a subject in general. So Mary Shelley has created a character in a novel that can look from the outside to society and how humans interact and the laws and the governments, and wonder, question, look at it from a foreigner's point of view, an objective, in quotes, let's call it, in quotes, objective point of view. And it allows her and us then to step back and look at these things through the character or through the creature's eyes, which is always a great narrative device. But that brings us to the end of the chapter, which brings us to chapter 6. Some time elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. The name of the old man was de Lacy. He was descended from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years in affluence. His son was bred in the service of his country, and Agatha had ranked with ladies of the highest distinction. A few months before my arrival, they had lived in a large and luxurious city called Paris. The father of Safi, I'm going with Safi, had been the cause of the ruin. He was a Turkish merchant and had inhabited Paris for many years. He became obnoxious to the government, though. He was seized and cast into prison, condemned to death. More parallels, right? Justine was sentenced to death, and now we're seeing the story. Wait, the story within the story within the story. I think that's enough layers, right? Yeah, I think so. How we're and I can only imagine this is intentional because there's so many parallels to all of the stories of the characters in here, and we have someone recounting a story, who's recounting a story, who then is recounting another story, and I guess it's actually four layers deep. Yeah, 4 layers deep. So it's crazy, right? To think about that. Plus the sense of belonging, the sense of just love, and having the sense of community, I should say, that is very present in this novel. But Felix had been present at the trial. He made at that moment a solemn vow to deliver him, and then looked around for the means. The Turk, amazed and delighted, endeavored to kindle the zeal of his deliverer by promises of reward and wealth. Felix rejected his offers with contempt. Yet when he saw the lovely Safi, it's always a lady, guys, isn't it? A treasure which would fully reward his toil and hazard. Guys are easy, right? The Turk quickly perceived the impression that his daughter had made on the heart of Felix, and endeavored to secure him more entirely in his interest by the promise of her hand in marriage, so soon as he should be conveyed to a place of safety. The zeal of Felix was warmed by several letters that he received from his lovely girl, a servant of her father's who understood French. I have copies of these letters, for I found means, during my residence in the hovel, to procure the implements of writing. But before I depart, I will give them to you. They will prove the truth of my tale. So again, we're breaking the fourth wall. Again, we're kind of reminded that the creature is telling this to Frankenstein, who is telling this to Walton. That is the name that I keep getting incorrect because it's been some time since I've thought about that guy. Safie related that her mother was a Christian Arab seized and made a slave by the Turks. But the day for the execution of the Turk was fixed. But on the night previous to it, he had quitted prison, and before morning was distant many leagues from Paris. Felix had procured passports in the name of his father, sister, and himself. They conversed with one another through the means of an interpreter and sometimes with the interpretation of looks. The Turk allowed this intimacy to take place and encouraged the hopes of his youthful lovers, while in his heart he had formed far other plans. He loathed the idea that his daughter should be united to a Christian. This is very similar to the, I shouldn't say similar, but kind of, to that story that he was a crew member who wanted to marry a woman, a Russian woman, if I remember correctly, and she had another lover, but then the father had a sense of honor and did not want that to happen, but still this very nice gentleman let it happen. So again, another kind of parallel here. He revolved 1,000 plans by which he should be enabled to prolong the deceit until it might no longer be necessary, and secretly to take his daughter with him when he departed. The government of France were greatly enraged at the escape of their victim and spared no pains to detect and punish his deliverer. The plot of Felix was quickly discovered, and de Lacy and Agatha were thrown into prison. This idea was torture to him. He delivered himself up to the vengeance of the law, hoping to free de Lacy and Agatha by this proceeding. He did not succeed. They remained confined for 5 months, deprived them of their fortune, and condemned them to a perpetual exile. They found a miserable asylum in the cottage in Germany where I discovered them. So they lost everything for love. Poor Felix. Now we know why he is incredibly melancholy. Such were the events that preyed on the heart of Felix. When the news reached Leghorn that Felix was deprived of his wealth and rank, the merchant commanded his daughter to think no more of her lover, and told her hastily that he had reason to believe that his residence at Leghorn had been divulged, and that he should speedily be delivered up to the French government. She heard of the exile of her lover, and learnt the name of the spot where he then resided. Taking her some jewels that belonged to her and a small sum of money, she quitted Italy. Her attendant, though, fell dangerously ill, and the poor girl died. And after her death, the woman of the house in which they had lived took care that Safie would arrive in safety at the cottage of her lover. True love, which brings us to chapter 7. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers, and impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which it developed to admire their virtues and to deprecate the vices of mankind. I must not omit a circumstance which occurred in the beginning of the month of August of the same year. I found on the ground a leathern portmanteau containing several articles of dress and some books. Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, Sorrows of Werther. I studied and exercised my mind upon these histories. I love this section that's coming up because it shows the value of fiction, not just learning histories and the sciences, but he's getting a full gamut of education from the mind to the heart, is he not? They produced in me an infinity of new images and feelings that sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. I thought Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. My person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? So he is using this to have some self-reflection, which is always great. But moving on, Plutarch's Lives, this book had a far different effect upon me from the Sorrows of Werther. I learned from Werther's imagination's despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections to admire and love the heroes of past ages. I felt the greatest ardor for virtue arise within me, and abhorrence for vice. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe. Like Adam, I was created apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. But this state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature. But I was a wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition. The monster is doing some serious soul-searching, is he not? Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pockets of the dress which I had taken from your laboratory. It was your journal of the 4 months that preceded my creation. I sickened as I read. "Hateful day when I received life," I exclaimed in agony. "Cursed Creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made a man beautiful and alluring, after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid from its very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and detested." And when I contemplated the virtues of the cottagers, I resolved at least not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them, which would decide my fate. The presence of Safie diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, just like the cover of this book. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him. I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. My attention at this time was solely directed toward my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I thought the children I could gain a goodwill and mediation of the old de Lacy. I knocked. "Who's there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this intrusion," said I. "I am a traveler in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said de Lacy. "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countryman. Are you French?" "No, but I was educated by a French family and understand that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love and of whose favor I have some hopes. I look around and I have no relation or friend upon earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever. The hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Do not despair. They are kind, they are the most excellent creatures in the world, but unfortunately they are prejudiced against me. If you are really blameless, cannot you undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task, and it is on the account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. If you will undeservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. Excellent man, I thank you and accept your generous offer. I trust that by your aid I shall not be driven from the society. Heaven forbid. My family have been condemned, although innocent. Judge, therefore, if I do not feel for your misfortunes. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him. I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. I heard the steps of my younger protectors. Now is the time! Save and protect me! You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not desert me in this hour of trial. Great God! Exclaimed the old man. Who are you? At that instant the cottage door was opened and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Agatha fainted, and Safie, she rushed out of the cottage, and Felix started forward. It tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. He dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick, and I quitted the cottage, and the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. Wow, the poor creature denied all of that work, all of that hope, gaining the hope from reading these books, just overhearing these people talking to the old man. But alas, it's a sad, sad tale what happened to him, which brings us to chapter 8. Cursed, cursed creator, why did I live? My feelings were those of rage and revenge. When night came, I quitted my retreat and wandered in the wood. I was like a wild beast that had broken the toils. Finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me. From that moment, I declared everlasting war against the species and more than all, against him who had formed me and sent me forth to this unsupportable misery. After much consideration, I resolved to return to the cottage, seek the old man, and by my representations win him to my party. When my hunger was appeased, I directed my steps towards the well-known path that conducted to the cottage. All there was peace. I crept into my hovel and remained in silent expectation. The inside of the cottage was dark, and I heard no motion. Presently 2 countrymen passed by, but pausing near the cottage, and soon after, however, Felix approached with another man, and I was surprised. "Do you consider," said his companion to him, "that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent, and to lose the produce of your garden? It is utterly useless. We can never again inhabit your cottage. My wife and my sister will never recover their horror. I never saw any of the family of De Lacy more. My protectors had departed and had broken the only link that held me to this world. I bent my mind towards injury and death. Anger returned, a rage of anger, and unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. With a loud scream, I fired the straw and heath and bushes which I had collected. The wind fanned the fire, bringing us back to the beginning, right? He enjoyed the warmth and the light of the fire, and now this fire is bringing about destruction. And the cottage was quickly enveloped by the flames, and now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? At length the thought of you crossed my mind, and to whom could I apply with more fitness than to him who had given me life? You had mentioned Geneva as the name of your native town, and towards this place I resolved to proceed. I traveled only at night, fearful of encountering the visage of a human being. Nature decayed around me, and the sun became heatless. Rain and snow poured around me. Mighty rivers were frozen. The surface of the earth was hard and chill and bare, and I found no shelter. The nearer I approached to your habitation, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. We're seeing a mirror image, are we not? Hopefully you can pick this up. It's pretty obvious. I don't think you have to be too smart to be picking this stuff up, but we have Victor Frankenstein, who he feels was wronged by the creature. He created the creature. He wants revenge on the creature, and now the creature feels wronged by the creator and wants revenge on humanity at large, but also to seek out his creator. So we have kind of this these two forces coming to a head, which is such a cool way to approach this, because the creature had all the best intentions at heart, right? He wanted to be accepted. He wanted to feel loved. He wanted to have these conversations and be a part of this family or a part of society. Victor Frankenstein was completely ruled by arrogance, by ambition, by his personal drive to create something great. And here we are, at the point where these two gentlemen are clashing. When I heard the sound of voices that induced me to conceal myself under that shade of a cypress, the young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, and she fell into a rapid stream. I saved her and dragged her to shore, but he darted toward me, this other guy, and tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper parts of the wood. He aimed a gun, which he carried at my body, and fired. He just can't catch a break, right? He's already admitted he wants revenge. He hates humanity. He sees a girl. He decides to save her. Then some guy sees this happening and Shoots the poor guy. But I had saved a human being from destruction, and as a recompense, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. For some weeks I led a miserable life in the woods, endeavoring to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, but after some weeks my wound healed, and I continued my journey. 2 months from this time I reached the environs of Geneva. At this time a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child. An idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced, and had lived too short a time to have imbibed a horror of deformity. If, therefore, I could seize him and educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. But as soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." "Let me go! Monster, ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. You are an ogre. Let me go, or I will tell my papa." "Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me." "Hideous monster, let me go. My papa is a syndic. He is Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me." "Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy." And I grasped his throat to silence him. And in a moment he lay dead at my feet because he does not know his own strength. So it is true. It is true that the creature killed this poor little boy. And clapping my hands, I exclaimed, "I too can create desolation. My enemy is not impregnable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him." Damn. And something glittered on his breast. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. I left the spot where I had committed the murder, when I perceived a woman passing near me, and here, I thought, is one of those whose smiles are bestowed on all but me. She shall not escape. I approached her unperceived and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. For some days I haunted the spot where these scenes had taken place. Just like a killer does, right? They always return to the scene of the crime. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. Which brings us to the final chapter of Volume 2, Chapter 9. The being finished speaking and fixed his looks upon me in expectation of a reply. And he continued, "You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being." "I do refuse it," I replied. "And no torture shall ever extort a consent from me. Begone! I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my archenemy, because my Creator do I swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you curse the hour of your birth." I intended to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of its excess. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them an hundredfold. That's a really weird way of saying that. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. And I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequence of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. "If you consent, neither you nor any human being shall ever see us again. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare." So even he's twisting the dagger further, saying, to exist, I do not need to kill, which is an interesting commentary right there as well. How can you, who long for the love and sympathy of man, persevere in this exile? You will return and again seek their kindness, and you will meet with their detestation. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in the task of destruction. How inconstant are your feelings, but a moment ago you were moved by my representations, and why do you again harden yourself to my complaints? His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him and sometimes felt a wish to console him. But when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. May not even this be a feint that will increase your triumph by affording a wider scope of your revenge? I paused some time to reflect on all he had related and the various arguments which he had employed. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that the justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. I consent to your demand on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighborhood of man, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile. I swear, he cried, by the sun and by the blue sky of heaven, that if you grant my prayer, while they exist, you shall never behold me again. And I saw him descend the mountain with greater speed than the flight of an eagle, and I wept bitterly, and clasping my hands in agony, I exclaimed, O stars and clouds and winds, ye are all about to mock me. If ye really pity me, crush sensation and memory. Let me become as naught, but if not, depart and leave me in darkness. But my presence, so haggard and strange, hardly calmed the fears of my family, who had waited the whole night in anxious expectation of my return. And the following day we returned to Geneva. And for myself, I was passive in all their arrangements, and the gentle affection of my beloved Elizabeth was inadequate to draw me from the depth of my despair. The promise I had made to the demon weighed upon my mind. By degrees, however, these feelings became calmed. I entered again into the everyday scene of life, if not with interest, at least with some degree of tranquility. Which brings us to the end of Volume 2. So what are you thinking so far? I'm loving the parallels on so many levels. I'm loving the story within the story within the story, which in itself is kind of dramatic irony in a way, because I was questioning at the very beginning what the purpose of the original character was, writing the letters to his sister. And I think now I know. Now I think it doesn't really matter how this book ends, if he has a voice in the end or if it ends with Frankenstein's voice. But we shall find out. I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And thank you for watching and hanging out with me. And I will see you guys in the next video with the hopefully dramatic conclusion of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.